Uh, First of all, just a little bit about me. I am up here coming live from Amherst, New Hampshire. I don't know if you can see the logo on my shirt. I've been a long time volunteer for the Northeast Conference on Science and Skepticism, and I gladly accepted Spiro's and Mitch's invitation to come speak to you. I gave this presentation quite a while back, actually, at a New Hampshire SkeptiCamp, where we think free or die. And I'd like to repeat this for you guys. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. The question I have for you is, am I a competent witness? And would you believe me if I told you something fantastical? So a little about me. First of all, I'm a retired Air Force officer. I did a 20-year career in the Air Force. I had a top secret TS-SCI clearance, even had an interim Yankee White, which is one of the highest levels of information that they let people have. It involves presidential movements and things like that. I also had a qualification known as cogent figure. This is a clearance for people to see and refuel classified aircraft. So a lot of things that a lot of people don't normally get to see. I'd be allowed to see those sort of things. As I mentioned, I was a pilot. I'm an instructor and an evaluator pilot in 2 Air Force airframes, as well as also being qualified on several civilian airframes, and also the T-37 and T-38. I have flown all over the world. The only continent I have not actually been to is Antarctica. Otherwise, I've flown everywhere. So I've done a lot of things that most pilots have never had the opportunity to do. As a matter of fact, I even have more hours than many airline pilots have. And I get to do things like air refueling, where the air traffic controllers give us this thing called MARSA, which means the military accepts responsibility for the separation of aircraft, which is a bit of a misnomer because we actually touch each other. But basically they mean that if we become a giant fireball in the sky, that's our fault. It's on us, not anything else. I would do a lot of things like rendezvousing with other aircraft. The picture you see here over on the right, it shows a KC-135 coming up to get fuel from a KC-135. I actually was a receiver-capable 135 pilot, as well, of course, as a tanker qual pilot. The receiver-capable ones usually were involved in a lot of special operations missions, and we would fly on night vision goggles quite often, never really using the lights that are on other aircraft. We'd have to, pick things out of the sky and be able to identify them very well in order to effect a rendezvous on them. In addition to being a pilot, some of the requirements for being a pilot is that we are given verbal and practical and written exams on an annual basis in the military. And part of that comes from meteorology. We get that all the time, so we should know what we see and what's going on around us. We even get daily meteorology briefings as we go flying. And that includes sometimes space weather. Mostly in terms of how it affects communications with our radios and sunspot activity and things like that. But, they'll sometimes point out other things, the aurora or whatever else may be going on. I also have a very intense hobby for astronomy. I consider it, a hobby that I even dedicated a lot of my electives to when I was in high school and college for some of the courses. And same thing with physics. As a graduate of a highly technical school, physics was, of course, one of those things that I had to take a lot of courses in order to build a foundation for being able to do things like thermodynamics, computational fluid dynamics, etc. So all of this knowledge and background and experience would definitely make you think that I would know what I'm talking about if I regale you with a tale of something that happened to me. So what happened? I don't recall the exact day and year this was. It was late 90s, so obviously this is far removed in time. But we were flying from Egypt to Saudi Arabia, and it was one of those dark 30 morning flights. So when I say early morning, I don't mean like 5 in the morning. I'm talking very early. And as we're flying along, we noticed something that appeared to be about 45 miles ahead of us. One of the things that you get taught quite extensively while in aviation is that if you see something in your windscreen and it's not moving, that means you're either trailing behind it or it's on a collision course. Obviously, a collision course is a bad thing if you're in an airplane full of 120,000 pounds of jet fuel. And you also learn to judge distance based on if it's a small or large aircraft, where do you think it is? We figured it must have been a large aircraft because it did look like it was about 45 miles ahead of us, and we couldn't paint it on radar. The radar we had in the updated Pacer Craig version of the KC-135 that I was flying at the time, it had an effective range over 100 miles. But when you get closer to about 50 miles, it's a little bit harder to get a skin paint on anything that you might be looking at. And as we're trying to figure out what the deal is with this traffic that is either oncoming or we're trailing behind it, we noticed that it was starting to climb. So while it was not moving in our windscreen relative to a lateral movement, we did notice that it was vertically moving. Now, while we were flying, one of the things that we did kind of notice is that the AWACS, which is the air traffic control aircraft, was pretty quiet. Not to be totally unexpected at this time of the morning, but still, it was, eerily quiet. As we did notice that this aircraft was climbing high, we did a little bit of trigonometry. Don't ever let anyone tell you you'll never use algebra in life, but yeah, we used algebra. And we were figuring out that this aircraft was climbing well above 80,000 feet. And because it wasn't receding from us or doing anything crazy like that, we figured it's not an SR-71. Those things move way too fast for us to keep track with it. So it must be something else. My goodness, what is it? So what was it? Now, would you believe me if I had regaled you with this story and told you about this aircraft that did things that no known aircraft could do? I mean, I could easily have filed the paperwork with the Air Force for, unobserved phenomenon, maybe gotten myself on CNN and, made a killing in the UFO circles, talking about this aircraft that behaved in ways that were impossible. Because it was an aircraft. We knew it was an aircraft, right? Actually, we thought about it a little bit more, and we figured it out. I'm sure all of you are thinking to yourselves and screaming in your heads, dude, it's freaking Venus. And that's exactly what it turned out to be. But our brains are simply just not the most reliable mechanisms that we have, to observe the reality around us. I mentioned earlier that if you see something in your windscreen that's not moving, like a planet is probably not going to move very much, it's on a collision course. my brain and the brain of the rest of my crew, we all thought it was an aircraft because that was the thing of immediate concern. That is the sort of thing that you're going to focus on. And no amount of training or expertise is going to make you immune from making a simple mistake like that. So, of course, we all had a good laugh about it later on as we landed, and we were like, I'm glad we didn't say anything to AWACS about, this traffic that we couldn't figure out what it was, and all chuckled about it. But it always made me think about how credulous media is about anything that someone who may have an impressive list of credentials is in regards to what they saw. We've had a lot of speakers already talk about, I saw what I saw, talking about our neurological humility, that we need to understand that no matter what our expertise is, no matter what our credentials are, we can make mistakes. And with that, I'd like to open the floor for questions, as well as any comments or additional there I was type of stories. I know my talk was generally scheduled to be a bit longer, but I think in the interest of succinctness, let's talk about Venus or other mistakes that you may have made.
Okay, so we have one question in the audience so far.
So did you figure it out in the moment that it was Venus, or did it take, after you landed?
Not in the moment. We persisted on thinking that this was an aircraft for probably a good 45 minutes. I know it wasn't one of these things, we had enough time to run, trigonometry math on a spot in the sky that we thought was 45 miles away and had climbed to a unusually high altitude. So even knowing that, it's morning time and Venus is often mistaken for other aircraft, that thought didn't cross our minds while we were flying. It took us a good long time. And I wish I knew or recalled who it was that finally said it was Venus. I'd like to think it was me, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't. But yes, we all felt a little bit chagrined and foolish after that.
Okay, Spiro has a question next.
Yeah, I'd like to know some of those snazzy government secrets you got there. And could you tell us who killed JFK?
So it was the guy that you see in that Netflix show. He was the guy on the grassy knoll.
Grassy knoll.
Okay, yeah.
Hi, I found that really fun, but quick question. It said or you made a mention, I'm not really sure if I'm remembering it right, but that Venus is often mistaken as an aircraft. Did you say that? Or did I mishear something? No,
it often is. As a matter of fact, one of the guys that I fly with, he tells a story of how he was. So when you're flying VFR patterns, which is visual flight rules around an airport, you're usually flying a oval around the airport, and then you come in for a landing. And there's a point where you're almost a beam or across from the landing area, and you start making a 180-degree turn in order to land, and it's a kind of a descending, curving turn. And he said as he came around, he saw what he thought was another airplane coming at him, and he took evasive maneuvers in order to avoid hitting this other airplane, which at maybe 30 seconds later he figured out was Venus. It's again one of those sort of things where, it's one of those things where your brain is so focused on the activity that you're doing and perhaps the dangers that are present in that point. So VFR traffic rules around an airfield is a high danger environment. There might be somebody out there flying that doesn't really follow all the other rules, doesn't know what they're doing. So you're always keeping your head on a swivel, watching out for some idiot that is in the traffic pattern where they may not be. So, you're more likely to have your brain instantly go to that particular danger, even though it is another phenomenon that is well understood.
So JD on the online has a question.
Sure.
JD.
Do you recall the person who proposed that it was Venus? Did they kind of elaborate on whether this was a process of reasoning, or did they kind of just have this sudden insight that was the most likely explanation?
It was more of a ha-ha type of revelation. It wasn't like, because it's doing these impossible things, it probably is not an aircraft. Therefore, what other phenomenon can it be? It was more like guys, I think that might be Venus. And it's actually kind of funny, as aviators, particularly military aviators, we're always taught to, we're cool, we never make mistakes, we're gods on earth, and it's always humbling to have something like that happen.
Okay, Harry, you have a question. Go ahead, Harry.
Thank you for not shooting down Venus. Following up on the previous question from the studio, can you tell me what it is that I'm doing wrong? Because here in New York City, there are very few objects that are bright enough to see in the night sky. So on those occasions when I do see one, my rule is to stop and watch it for a minute to see if it moves, and if it doesn't, then I say it's got to be a planet. Because if it were a plane, it would have moved by now. So how is it that what you asserted, which I'm sure is correct, that Venus often is mistaken for a flying object, how does that happen when it isn't moving?
As I mentioned, so if you're in an aircraft flying, there is the concept of relative motion. And if with Venus being so far away and you're going to be looking in the screen and you don't see it moving, to an aircraft pilot, the very first thing they're going to think of if they see a light that is not moving in their windscreen is, I'm on a collision course with that light. So that's sort of the, a different perspective than someone who is on the ground and watching a light. They're not going to say to themselves necessarily that, well, that's a planet, obviously, because it's not moving in the sky. Whereas, the thing that we worry about more is the thing that's not moving. So it's more of a framing of their expectations and what they should be more concerned about.
What did you interpret as climbing?
That was over the 45-minute stretch. Remember, this was in the morning. So the sun is beginning to rise, and the rotation of the Earth is, giving us the illusion that it is rising because of the Earth's rotation.
So Russ, you had a question?
Well, I have more of a comment, which everybody loves, of course. Harry, to your point about being on the ground and mistaking Venus for something strange, I used to be related to UFOs. There's a lot of different things, like the clouds are moving and you don't have a good point of reference. It could seem to the clouds are stationary and the light behind the clouds is moving. There's all kinds of things like that. And to speak more about what Steve was saying, if you like Steve's analysis of UFO stuff, by the way, go to AIPTcomics.com and look up his name, because he did a couple amazing things for me. One on Operation Mainbrace, which really has no information about it, but he also did the most detailed look at the Kinross plane disappearance up in Lake Michigan, I believe it was, that I've ever seen anywhere on Earth. So big props to him for that.
Thank you, Russ. Olga, you have a question.
Yeah, Olga, go.
Hi, I don't know if you hear the first presentation, which was mine. I was mentioning there that a lot of people, some people think that Venus is UFO. If I will be, if sometime I am doing the next another presentation on night sky, could I mention your case? Could I mention your name or not?
Absolutely. That's why I share this. When you mentioned that in your presentation, I kind of chuckled to myself because I was like, oh, there's Olga stealing my thunder.
No, it's not stealing thunder. It's just I mentioned it in the different. No, my point was absolutely different. That people should night sky, all people. But if even pilots do this, you see,
an astronomer pilot even.
Yes, it's very significant. It's very interesting because it's so wide to our. I don't know, psychology and our expectation. That's the main point of your what you're saying. That your expectation is actually making impression on what you see.
Absolutely, absolutely. Rob, you have a question, sir.
Just an observation there. I wanted to point that out a few months ago when the Navy UFO flap hit like the big time news. Like I must have watched 3 different networks, CNN, ABC, CBS, probably all on the same weekend, you know, interviewing expert witnesses who were all pilots having seen these things. And one guy actually said, every single day, almost every pilot sees these things all over the world. That proves it's true.
Oh, yeah. I don't. Again, that's just the, you know, my sort of chagrin at, you know, these expert witnesses. You know, just because they have the qualifications doesn't mean they really know what they're talking about.
I mean, and frankly, just a statement like that would be so, if it was really that common that everyone, then they probably would be real. If everyone was seeing them all the time, all the place, there would be high def recordings of them all over the place, all over the time. But no, it was such a ludicrous statement. And whoever the journalist was who just accepted that and moved on.
Yep.
So
the fight we have.
Yeah, we have 2 more questions in the room now. I think I saw your.
Yeah, I don't know if you have time. It's just I have my own like kind of funny story where I got stupid.
If it's a long story, maybe we'll just do it.
Just a brief thing. Isn't the government now starting funding on UFOs due to these pilot sightings?
So that's a little bit of a misnomer. The government necessarily isn't funding anything on UFOs. I'd like to point you back, and I think Carl Sagan did a good job on this in Demon Haunted World. The government is interested in knowing what bad actors may be able to do in order to penetrate our airspace. So they are looking for legitimate aircraft penetrating our airspace. The thought is that quite often what some people may see that they can't understand or explain could be a bad actor. So they will investigate these. But unfortunately, it's, you know, so much fun to talk about, you know, the Pentagon spending $800 for a hammer or whatever else, that it morphs into a story of that the government is funding UFO research programs. And that's not really what they're doing.
And if you, just to pin everything a little more, the New York City Skeptics YouTube page, we had Nick West on a little while ago, who had an amazing talk about the Navy videos and government's response to it. There was a government report that was very perfunctory, about 6 pages of actual content saying, it doesn't seem to be foreign actors, so we don't care. And that was about the extent of the government's involvement. Sadly, Harvard has taken up their slack, and they are doing a project with some real scientists and also wackos like Lou Elzon.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, you might as well reveal.
I'll give you my quick, stupid, me feeling stupid story, which was I was in a commercial aircraft as a passenger, and I looked out the window. It was a clear day. It was daytime, and I see a plane following us, kind of below us, but it seemed like it was following us. And it's like it's keeping up with us and it's matching everything we do. Like, what's going on here? And it took me a long time to figure out that it was the plane shadow. Because it was a clear day. You don't normally see the shadow because there are clouds in between you and the ground, and it was flat. So that also made it more.
All right.